The Vancouver Canucks surprised a lot of people a year ago, but can they build on that and take it to the next level? Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks joins us to discuss that and all things Vancouver Canucks next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks, Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, strong season for Vancouver, surprised a few people last year. But what will it take after these offseason moves for them to take that next step and go on a longer playoff run? Do you think that the offseason moves they made help them in that regard?
Yes and no, Gil. As you know, life is it ain't black and white. It's complicated, especially talking to an Islanders guy like yourself who cheers for the Green Bay Packers. You know that life is complicated.
Yes.
And with the Vancouver Canucks, I think, they made some good moves this offseason, but there's still some question marks, right? Even for a team that, I'll put my bias aside, I still think this is a top 5 team in the NHL entering the regular season here for 2024-25. I think they did a really good job of increasing the depth at forward. I love the signing of DeBrusk. At the time, I was a little skeptical on the term, but for the dollar amount they're paying him, he doesn't have to be a superstar. If he's just a solid top 6 guy, it's going to work out. The additions of Heinen and Sprong and Sherwood at bargain basement prices, I think those are all guys who are going to be key contributors for this team next season as well. I think all of them can kind of punch up the lineup in a way that Nils Höglander did last season. So the depth at forward is pretty phenomenal, to be honest. I think it's one of the deepest, 12 sets of forwards in the league. On defense, I think it's a bit of a different story. You let Zadorov walk, and I know it was a lot of money, and I know it was a lot of term, but now you kind of have Tyler Myers back in a top 4 role, Derek Forbort, who Boston Bruins fans are, cheering and dancing when this guy doesn't re-sign with their team, and then Vinny Desharnais, who Canuck fans got a good look at this guy in the playoffs, and I know analytically he was good in the regular season, and I've been more impressed with some of that tape, but I did not think he was good in that series against the Vancouver Canucks. So the defense on paper is worse. The forwards on paper are better. But the great equalizer of the Canucks is, of course, Thatcher Demko in net. I mean, he was so good in the regular season. Goaltending's weird. We've seen it even with Demko, but I think this is a guy that if the Canucks don't overplay him, and they shouldn't based on what Shelovs did, this should be a team that continues to be one of the best teams in the NHL next season.
So here's my question, playing devil's advocate here. Great regular season. You mentioned the deep forward, the questionable blue line. Is this team built more for the regular season than for the postseason?
That's a great question. I think the way that the Canucks have put this team together, they are putting a lot of trust in the coaching staff to develop the defense and to being one of the best blue lines in hockey. And like I said, on paper, the defense is worse. I don't think there's any question about that. But I also think this coaching staff deserves the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. Because, last season, if you told me that Tyler Myers was going to be resurrected at the age of 34, I would have laughed in your face. To me, that was, the craziest story on the Canucks last season. This blue liner who they've been paying top pairing dollars for, and he was a replacement level player for the better part of 4 years. Yeah. This guy finally snaps out of it and plays like an actual, low-end top 4 defenseman. I mean, that was a phenomenal turn in his game. Noah Juleson as well. And Nikita Zadorov got way better. Carson Soucy looked great. I mean, I think the wonders that this coaching staff did with the defense makes me think that if they can continue that same magic this season, that this team is built for the playoffs because you need depth. And I think, again, if the coaching staff, that's the kind of the big X factor, I guess, for the Vancouver Canucks, is if the coaching staff can continue to work wonders, make miracles happen in Vancouver with that defense, then, the Canucks are going to be, well, in a good spot entering the playoffs.
You mentioned Thatcher Demko, obviously a great story and a great goaltender. How many games do you think he should start, and how should they balance the need to win every game and yet the need to have him fresh come the stretch drive in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's much more important to have him fresh for the stretch drive. I think for me, no more than 55 games. Look, you got a guy in Shilovs who, and it's interesting because I honestly thought Shilovs was not that impressive in the AHL last season when I watched him. Like, very pedestrian. Had some great games, but had some pretty bad moments as well. But he's shown that on the big stage he can handle it, right? He's done it internationally. He did it for the Canucks in the postseason last year. I think you got to, trust Shilovs and give him, 30 starts this season, right? Because we've seen with Thatcher Demko, and I've been pumping Thatcher Demko's tires for the better part of a decade since he was drafted. I've been a huge fan of this guy and his style, his that psychology degree. He's got the great demeanor. I mean, his technique. He's a fantastic goaltender, but he's gotten injured almost every season. So you cannot overplay this guy. That's probably the absolute no-no for the Canucks next season. Do not overplay Thatcher Demko. Use Archer Shilovs. Use Yuri Patera if you have to. He looked okay in a couple of games last season for Vegas. But you got to keep Thatcher Demko healthy for the stretch drive, because I think there's a solid argument. Again, you're talking to Locked On Canucks, maybe a biased host here, but if Demko's in the net for that playoff run, I think the Canucks have a good chance of beating the Oilers and going to the Cup Finals.
That close. What is your biggest concern about this team now that training camp is less than a month away?
I'm trying to give you something other than the defense, but it's definitely the defense. Look, Carson Soucy now is your number 3, right? And this is a guy who has not been really a top 4 defenseman at all in his NHL career. Even last year in Vancouver, he was more of a bottom pairing guy. Tyler Myers, can he be as good as he was last season? I think that's a stretch. And these are the guys you have penciled into your top 4 right now. And I think with the Canucks, what they did last year is, they basically had a top 2 and a bottom 4, right? Like Hughes and Hronek played a ton, and then your other 2 pairings are more or less third pairings. And that strategy can work for the Canucks. But again, if one of those guys goes down, or maybe the coaching staff can't coach this defense like the way they did last season, there's going to be problems for this hockey team. But I think kind of the remedy there is, and again, this is crazy for Canuck fans to say, because through the Benning era, 10 years of bad moves and lack of trust, there's a lot of trust in this management, this coaching staff right now. And I think if the defense, if things aren't quite going the Canucks' way on defense this season, they got a bit of cap space. They got some extra forwards to dangle. I think you're going to see Patrick Allvin, who's been one of the busiest general managers in the league, make a move to rectify a problem on defense if it becomes a problem.
You talk about defense. Are there any possible prospects or young guys who are ready to step in, whether it's on the blue line or up front?
Yeah, I mean, the Canucks prospect pool certainly isn't one of the stronger ones in hockey. It's definitely, I would say, quantity over quality. But obviously, the X factor next season is Jonathan Lekkerimäki. And I think now with what they did in free agency, there's a very slim chance that he suits up or at least starts in the NHL next season. But he's the Canucks' most talented prospect, bar none. And he's going to play in Abbotsford. He's going to be an option for them. If he has an insane training camp, I think there's not a slim chance that he could join the Canucks next season. And aside from that, it's probably guys who are, your tweener types, bottom 6 type. I know on defense, there honestly isn't a ton. Kyle and I kind of went through, the defensive depth chart, and you're looking at guys like Christian Wolanin and Guillaume Brisebois. None of these are really prospects, right? There's the Elias Pettersson 2.0, but, he's just going to be in his first full season in North America. I don't think he's really an option. Cole McWard, who may be like a Chris Tanev, maybe, but he's still a young guy. So no big prospects on defense. And at forward, aside from Lekkerimäki, again, you're looking at guys pushing for bottom 6 roles. I mean, Archie Baines was a great story last season, the most talented player on the Abbotsford Canucks roster. Great story. They're proud of Surrey, BC, where I'm currently recording this podcast from. No bias, okay? But Archie, I think, has a lot of skill in his game. Played a lot of PK in Abbotsford, and I think he's got a chance of being a call-up option. Again, with the signings they made, I don't know if any of these guys have a huge chance, but he's got an option. And I guess the last guy I should mention is Vasily Podkolzin, who it's kind of a make or break year, right? Like after the signings they made in free agency, this guy doesn't really have a spot among the 12 forwards on this team right now. He's got to have a heck of a training camp. I believe he's waiver eligible too now. So this is a make or break time for Vasily Podkolzin as well. Former top 10 pick 5 years ago now.
Wow, 5 years. It's time. It is time. So, Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find Locked On Canucks wherever you listen to podcasts and, of course, on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter. You can also follow my co-host. I hear he's posting on TikTok. I'm too old for that, but my co-host Kyle Bowen, Bhawan, posting lots of Canuck stuff on TikTok as well. That's where you can follow us. Thanks, Gil. Appreciate you asking me that.
Thanks, Trevor. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.